In this episode of Beyond Behaviour, I sit down with Nadia Maffucci Di Rienzo, a colorectal cancer survivor. Nadia was first diagnosed with inflammatory bowel disease, IBD, more specifically ulcerative colitis, in July 1997. In November 2022, she was diagnosed with early stage colorectal cancer and now has a permanent ostomy. Nadia is a digital creator and manages a personal blog and Instagram account called Gutsy Girl Diaries, where she shares her journey with IBD, colorectal cancer, and now life with an ostomy. It is her goal to use these platforms to advocate, educate, and break the stigma associated with invisible illnesses and disabilities. Nadia is a mom and a wife and is thriving and healthy. She's here to share how she overcame all these adversities and how it all affected her as a parent as well. I hope you enjoy this episode and take from it what you need. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Beyond Behavior. I am here today with Nadia Maffucci Di Rienzo, and as you heard in the intro, she's a colorectal cancer survivor and she is living with IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, more specifically ulcerative colitis. And she's here to talk to us all about how she's overcome all this, how she's doing today, and how it's all affected her as life as a mom. So, Nadia, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here. Thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And you and I connected. I do follow you on social media, which is how I kind of knew about you. And you and I connected quickly a couple of weeks ago, talked about your journey, my son's journey, and kind of compared notes. And I have to say that I am so like in awe of your vulnerability and your willingness to just share your story with the world. So let's start with that. Let's start about, tell me a little bit about your health journey and how you got to the point where you wanted to launch Gutsy Girl Diaries.
Sure, of course. So I was diagnosed with IBD at the young age of 15, almost 16. And at the time, there was not really any information available to people who were diagnosed. You did have your doctor, physician, but in terms of, connecting with other people who were going through a similar experience or, maybe just to kind of touch base with people and see, what were they doing? What medications were they on? What kind of diets were they following? There was not that sort of community that occurred. So I went through years and years of that and years of keeping my diagnosis a secret and my flare-ups a secret and all of that. And, in March of 2018, I had a really, really bad flare with my ulcerative colitis. And I used that as kind of like the fuel to start my journey with Gutsy Girl Diaries and sharing my story and, my recipes and all of that. So that's how kind of everything came about.
And yeah, I mean, you said, when you were diagnosed, and you're right, it was in the 90s. There wasn't a community, there wasn't such excuse me, awareness, and now there is. And when people hear a flare, and until my son was diagnosed, I didn't really understand it, even though I have people in my life with IBD. But a flare isn't like, oh, your stomach hurts for a couple days. I mean, I don't know what your flares were like, but when my son has had flares, he's like debilitated. Like it is, you can't eat, you have no energy, you're in pain, you're in bed. It is really, really crippling. What were your flares like when they used to be active?
So exactly the same, it either would be, a slow process of like, not feeling well for a couple weeks and then, you know, all of a sudden feeling really crappy, or it would just come on like a ton of bricks. And that's kind of what happened in when I had my daughter. I had one of the worst flares I have ever experienced. And it happened like that. It was kind of like an overnight thing where it just hit me like a ton of bricks, symptoms all the time. And, it's not just the ulcerative colitis symptoms in terms of, the, blood in the stool or, running to the washroom all the time. It's everything because IBD is an autoimmune disease. It affects your whole body, right? And when you say being debilitated, that's exactly how I would feel, right? Like I felt like an old person, right? Like I would be, in my 20s and I just, couldn't get out of bed and it would just be really challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, like you said, you can't function, you can't get out of bed. And for you to live with that for so long and to be diagnosed as a teenager when you're already going through so many life changes and not have a community and keep it a secret, like that's a lot. That's a lot for a kiddo. Okay, so then you launched Gutsy Girl Diaries, where you do a really great job of like sharing recipes and sharing lifestyle and all that stuff. And then tell us about your journey since then because it's unfolded in ways that you probably didn't expect.
Yes, for sure. So when I started my Gutsy Girl Diaries, I started, with sharing, recipes and IBD and working out and supplements that I take and that kind of thing. And then when I started to get people reaching out to me, right, through DM on more of a personal note that didn't feel comfortable sharing their story, but just kind of felt like, they had this place of community and connectedness. That's what really, drove me to continue to share and to be even more open about the things that I was experiencing. Because what I learned is that IBD is not a cookie cutter disease, right? What works for me may not work for the next person, and vice versa. So, us coming together and sharing our stories and sharing our experiences only helps us to understand the disease even more and only helps us, manage our symptoms even better, right?
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, and I mean, I belong to a whole bunch of like Facebook mom, dad, parent groups of IBD. And yeah, like no one's the same. And what my son can and cannot eat is different than what you can and cannot eat. And there's so many different triggers, and it's really process of elimination.
yes.
And my son's 11, and flare ups scare the bejeebies out of him. So
Yep.
it's
It's
just,
true.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's true.
I
I
know
mean,
exactly how he feels. It's like
right?
as soon as you start having like a little symptom, it's like your mind starts going a
Yes.
million miles a minute.
The anxiety is crazy. So if he'll eat something that, I mean, and we've been lucky, we've only had one real flare since he was diagnosed. But if he eats something that kind of makes his stomach hurt, or like, he goes to the bathroom and his stool's a little bit off, he gets so anxious.
Yeah.
And we really have to work through that. I love that you've created this community, and I really, as a parent, it helps me just kind of see what other people go through, and I show my son, like I share everything with him because I think it's so healthy and important for him to know. Now, aside from just the IBD, because I did, as I mentioned in my intro view, I did say that you have now have an ostomy bag
Yes.
or pouch. I'm not sure what the lingo is.
Both are acceptable.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there's been a story between you getting that ostomy and where you were when you started Gutsy Girls Diary. So do you want to share that?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Having IBD does put you at an increased risk of getting colorectal cancer, right? And so, especially because when I was diagnosed with colorectal cancer, I was already at the point of where, I've had IBD for, 25 years, and that also increases your risk, right? So, in that and in trying to mitigate or like, keep on top of things, my gastroenterologist, had me on a 2-year screening. So every 2 years, I would have a full colonoscopy, whether I was symptomatic or not, like whether I was in a flare or not in a flare, I would be screened for colorectal cancer, which, I find that with that screening, it really did, you know, put me in a circumstance that I can live and enjoy my life today, right? Because we know that, it is, even though it is a very common cancer to be diagnosed with, it can be quite aggressive. So when I was diagnosed, I was actually in a clinical trial for my IBD, and I was doing really well on the trial. I was 4.5 years in on this trial and doing amazingly. Then all of a sudden I started having a little bit of symptoms, but they weren't really flare symptoms, right? It was hit and miss, and I knew it was not a flare, right? It's
Yeah,
like it's just
you just
something
know.
inside me. I knew it wasn't a flare, right? And so my gastro, her and I have a great relationship. I mean, she's been my gastroenterologist. Well, she retired now, but she was my gastroenterologist since when I was first diagnosed at 15. And, you know, we did have like a really good relationship, and she was open and honest with me, and I was open and honest with her. So she knew when I would bring certain concerns forward that they were really valid and really bothering me. So I always felt validated in that, and I know that a lot of patients, that's a barrier between them and their physician. So when I had my screening, because I started having these symptoms, and she's like, you know what, you're due anyways for your screening. Let's go ahead and book it. And I was booked for my 40th birthday vacation. She's like, go on your vacation, don't worry. And lo and behold, while I was away, I had no symptoms at all. So then I was like, oh, this is like, maybe anxiety related or something like that, right? Anyway, come back, have my scope, and before going in, we were joking and laughing and saying about how, she's known me for all these years, and I was like this poster child for this clinical trial and all of this. And then when you come out, and then she comes to talk to you, and I just saw her face was just not the same, right? So she did explain to me that I had a polyp that she couldn't remove, and it could possibly be cancer, could possibly be benign, but either way, I'd have to have some sort of surgery to have either the polyp removed or my colon removed, right? So yeah, then I ended up getting my results, and it was cancerous. And then I went ahead with, everything that went along with that, and preparing for surgery and all of that. But when you mention, the ostomy pouch, like that was something that I have to say I feared my whole life. I never wanted my whole life. I knew it was a potential outcome of, IBD as well, not just of having cancer, but, a lot of IBD patients, with Crohn's or colitis have an ostomy bag. And I was so dead against it. I would do anything in my power, any medication, any diet, any whatever, to avoid having this pouch. And then when I was faced with the reality of like, I had to have one, right? It was a very difficult, thing to accept for sure.
Yeah. So think to process, think to, you probably went through a grieving process, right? I mean,
100%. Yeah.
yeah, and I speak about grieving a lot with parents that I work with and things like that because any big change that we have in life, whether it's with our child or ourselves, we have to grieve it. Like it is such a
Yes.
natural part, right? So whether even with my son's diagnosis, and I knew since he was 3, and I'm talking about his ADHD, not his
Yes.
colitis.
Yeah.
I grieved that too, even though I knew, right? So like you had to go through a grieving process, but now you have the ostomy, and just so that people know what an ostomy bag is, do you mind explaining that really quickly?
Yes.
Yeah,
So what I have is I have a stoma. So a stoma is actually my small intestine that is pulled through my abdominal wall, and it's on the outside of my body. And then I attach an ostomy pouch to it, and that's basically how I go to the bathroom. And so there's so many different appliances and appliance systems. Everybody just kind of does like a trial and error in what works for them. And there's so many products and stuff like that. And that's a whole other community as well, right? So yeah, it was a huge adjustment. Having your kind of like your insides on the outside of your
yeah,
body, it is a huge adjustment as well. But in a lot of ways, it's actually given me so much of my life back, because in having IBD and the other symptoms that are go along with that, right? And the side effects that you have because of that, because it is an autoimmune disease, right? It's given me a lot of things that I couldn't do before, right? That I was scared to do. I'm able to do now, right? So I kind of try to, when I have my not so good days, try to think about the positive things that, I'm able to do now, that when I had my IBD and when I'd be flaring, it was impossible for me to do. So
yeah, and I mean, that's amazing. So you're thriving, you're doing well, you're cancer free. Are you cancer free?
yes, yes.
Okay.
So I still am under screening, right?
Yes.
So I haven't reached the 5 year mark, but my last scans were what they call no evidence of disease. So
Amazing.
I'll take it.
Yeah, no, amazing. And I mean, that's great news. That's what you want to hear for anyone, because it's a scary word, right? So I'm sure colitis was scary enough, and then you had to face cancer. And through all this, you have a beautiful family, you have kiddos, you have a partner, and how did this affect you? How did you kind of rise through all this adversity? Because I know that you're just from following you and talking to you, you're a very hands on, involved mom and have a really great relationship with your kiddos. So tell me how you overcame that, because that must have been like you must have had some really dark days, right?
Definitely, definitely. First, starting with my partner. So my husband and I, we've been together since we were, 16. So I already had IBD when we started dating. Honestly, he was one of the people that I told, right? So even though it was a secret, I told him,
Yes.
right? And he's been with me through all of it, and he's been like my biggest supporter, not only like in with stuff with my health, but also with my Gutsy Girl Diary stuff, and bringing things forward and helping others, and supporting me in every single way possible. But in terms of becoming a mom, it was I was always scared that, my IBD would affect my fertility, right? And it didn't, you know what I mean? I didn't have any issues, getting pregnant or anything like that. And then while I was pregnant, my IBD was perfect. And so my gastro always said, if you could stay pregnant forever, you'd never be sick, right? Which you can't do that. But the thing is that while I was pregnant, because of that, against kind of medical advice, I stopped all of my medication because I was feeling so good. And I'm like, I don't want to take anything while I'm pregnant and all this stuff. And it was all fine until, my daughter was about like 11-ish weeks old. And I started to have like a really, really severe flare. And it was the one of the I had two major, really bad flares. It was one of the worst ones that I've ever experienced. And it's crazy, but it's like, my daughter I remember when I started to have symptoms, and my symptoms kind of started as like at night, I would get really, really high fevers, right? My inflammation was so high that I would get really high fevers. I remember one night I was on the couch. I had a fever. I had put her down. She's like 10 weeks old. It's 9:30 at night. And in my mind, I was like, how am I going to do this tonight? Like waking up, feeding her, changing her, all of that, right? My husband had to work. And even though he helps me, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah.
So that night, she slept the first night. It's like she knew I needed to rest, right? So, and she slept 9:30 p.m. to 6 a.m. Like I will never forget it, like ever forget it. And from there, like it really affected, that flare really affected my ability, I feel like, to really embrace motherhood at that time, because I was breastfeeding. I loved breastfeeding. I had a lot of milk, like I was always feeding her, pumping this, that, all of that. And then because my flare became so severe, like I lost all my milk. And it was like overnight, like to the point where people are like, they could see it on me, like that,
Yes.
my boobs were smaller,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So yeah, and so that was a really hard thing, because I loved breastfeeding so much, and I felt like it was such a great time, like just for me and my daughter to bond and it was just something between me and her, and just all the benefits as well of
Of course.
breastfeeding, right? But everything ended up being okay. You know what I mean? There's nothing wrong with formula feeding. I always supplemented with formula, but the whole thing around being able to care for your child, right? It's one thing when my IBD is affecting me or my health is affecting me, but when it's affecting my family, my children, yeah, there is a lot that goes along with that, like in terms of feelings of like being a burden and all of that, right? And not that anybody ever made me feel that way. It was more of like an internal struggle.
Well, of course, because again, your vision and picture of what motherhood would be like, especially since it was that way for the first 10 or so weeks,
Yeah.
is now changed overnight,
Yeah.
and it's become something you can't control and something internal to you, right?
Yes.
Another grieving moment, um,
Yes.
which motherhood and being an adult comes with many, but of course, like you now had to pivot, and like your whole way of being to change overnight, and you're exhausted and you're emotional and the hormones, like in all the things.
Yes.
So incredible, how you were able to just kind of pick up and go, because as moms we have to. And then how were you able to kind of get through the cancer journey? And you were already a mom of more than one kiddo at that point, I believe.
Yes. Yeah.
And I know that, again, your family is very tight knit. So how were you able to kind of get through that, and still be the strong person who I'm sure you were for your kids, because you just seem like you're not the kind of person who will just lay down and say, I
Yeah.
can't, right?
I feel like sometimes it's like the opposite, and it was crazy that after I had like such a major surgery, it's hard to like just stop and not do things, right? So with the children and with the cancer diagnosis, we waited a little bit to tell them, because I wanted to have, I wanted to be upfront with them in a way that they would be able to understand.
Yes.
Right. So I didn't want to, say, oh, mom has cancer, but I don't know what's next and I don't know what we're doing. And, I didn't want to create more fear
You want to
than
have
I
a
needed,
plan.
to. Yeah.
Yeah.
So once I received like my staging and I knew, like, you know what I mean, a little bit of a way forward that, yes, I would be having this life-changing surgery. I wasn't going to be doing like any type of, chemotherapy or radiation treatment. So I only did the surgery. And so I was able to focus on that and explaining to them, what an ostomy is. And, we watched a lot of videos about it. They did have a lot of questions about just how it works. Like my son is more like the math, science, mechanical type person. So he was all concerned and interested on, how it actually worked. And then, my daughter had a lot of other like questions as well, like just surrounding the ostomy and how it would affect like my everyday life, you know what I mean? And can you still go swimming, mom? And can you still do your exercise, because she knew that I love to work out and all of this stuff, right? So very valid questions. And in speaking to other people and other family members who have had a parent who unfortunately had gone through a cancer diagnosis, and where they weren't so open, you know what I mean, and didn't tell their kids of certain things that were going on, right? I mean, as parents, we don't tell our kids everything, right? But their message to me was like, I wish I would have known more, right?
Yeah.
So as a child,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so I kind of took that to heart, and I tried to just also make it in a way that they would understand. And I did also speak to their pediatrician, you know what I mean? And I let them, because I didn't want to scar them in any way, right? And I did speak to my pediatrician and asked him, his thoughts and how we should approach, the subject and all of that.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, I grew up with parents who were more closed and not sharing all the things. And as a grown up, I'm now finding certain things out about my family history and health history and all that
Yes,
stuff, right? So I'm the same way as you. I am as open and transparent as I can be with my kids, because I think
yes,
A, it's healthy, and B, it just models, like teaches them that you can overcome things. Um, yeah, and age appropriate, of course. And I love that because they didn't have to see you going through something scary and then have it be even scarier because they don't know what's happening around them, right? And
exactly.
that's the piece, yeah.
Yeah.
And I actually really appreciate and love the fact that you kind of didn't have that emotional, like, oh my god, I got to tell the kids. You just kind of like took a breath, took a minute, came up with a plan, had a strategy, because then you can actually say to them, listen, it'll be okay. Like, here's what we're gonna do. And
Yep.
you also weren't coming from a place where you just got the news, you're heightened, like you have to
Yeah.
process it,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
So
it's true. Like I was just like on the day that I got my diagnosis, it was such a crazy day because I had waited like 5 weeks for these results, which
yeah,
was
excruciating, I'm sure.
abnormal, right? Because I've had a million colonoscopies
Yeah,
and it's never taken like this long. So it was actually something that happened. There was at the lab, like a car crashed into the lab, and like there was all this stuff that happened there, so that caused the delay in getting my results to me, right? Because already I was thinking, I'm like, something happened. I go, do I have to redo this thing? Like
yeah,
my mind already started going. And again, like when they called me in for my results, right? And my gastro was there, and she was emotional about it
yeah,
because she's known me and all these years. And like I'll never forget, like she goes, I tried really hard for this not to happen to you, right? And we just, and she's like a stone cold, like
yeah,
she's very and for her to be like that emotional with me, and to like it validated, like what I mean, that we aren't just a number all the time,
yeah,
right? That there are physicians out there that care, right? Like she's always been also a person that advocated as well for mental health, right? Like she'd always check in on my mental health as well. And even though it's a service that she wouldn't be able to provide, but she could refer me if I needed,
of
right?
course.
So
That's amazing, and you're right. You did luck out with a doctor like that. I mean, again, my son has a really good team at Sick Kids,
yeah,
but that's the Sick Kids world, and
yeah,
I always worry about when he ages out. then what? Because he's going to go
Yep.
to somebody brand new. What are they going to be like? How much wraparound support are they going to give him? Because right now he has that. And it's so important, right? Like as you know, work in social services and I, I'm a parent coach and do all those things. And I believe in wraparound support. Like, you know, any diagnosis, any hardship will affect you in many ways through your life. So you need that community, you need that village around you to really be able to lift you up. So that's amazing. Too bad she's retired because she sounds like somebody who would, continue to make amazing change in the IBD world. But yeah, your story is incredible, and I love that like I said, you're putting it out there, and I'm so happy that you are thriving and that you are healthy and that you are, here to tell your story. And yeah, you lead a very busy life. I know that, off the podcast, we talked about kids and all their extracurriculars. And, you and I are very busy moms, and I think that's the way we like it. But good on you for overcoming all this crazy adversity and these health challenges. And I know that you're a real advocate for healthy living as well. And you do share a lot of really amazing recipes on Gutsy Girl Diaries they actually look, I haven't tried them yet because my son is almost 11, so he's very, um, what's the word? He's not open to trying,
Yeah.
healthy, although he likes to bake and cook. So like my strategy is like we just baked last night. So my strategy is to sit down and like look through
Thank
your
you.
recipes with him and just be like, let's try one. What do you want to make? Right? Because he loves to be in the kitchen. But your recipes look good. Like they
Thank you.
look yummy. And I think that's so important with kids. Tell me a little
Yes.
bit about how you kind of have learned about healthy eating or how you kind of come up with these recipes. And from what I see, you get your kids involved in things like that. Is this a whole family change that you've made, health change, or is this like just you?
Well, I try to incorporate because number one, I don't want to be making like 10 meals every
Yes.
night, right?
Yes.
So I try
Absolutely.
to incorporate things and, not everybody's going to like the same things, but having like those options. So, for example, if I focus on a protein that everybody likes, then I'll make a few sides so that everybody has like something healthy that will go along with it. We are a family. I don't eat a super amount of, processed carbohydrates like breads and pastas and that kind of thing. We do eat them, don't get me wrong, but it's not top of our list in terms of like on the everyday, right? So I do try to focus on things that are, single ingredient foods, right? So I feel like that helps me in terms of digesting. In terms of with my ostomy, I've had to make some changes from my IBD life as well. Like a lot of things are the same, but I'm noticing that when I have things that are higher in fiber, they're harder to pass, like through my ostomy and stuff like that. And when I think back, I'm like, that was the same thing with my
Yes.
IBD,
Yeah.
right? Because it would be harder for your body to break those things down, right? And I just try to explore more, like in terms of seasoning, right? And not necessarily spicy, right? Because
Yes.
the kids won't have spicy,
Yeah.
but flavor wise,
Yeah.
right? Because when I was flaring, well, flaring is one other animal, but when in just my everyday cooking, right? Like things that taste really good, right? So if
Yes.
there's a flavor profile like that your family likes, then stick with that. Or introducing, like different flavor profiles, like Greek or Asian or that kind of thing,
Yeah.
right? So that really I find helps shape the recipes that I make, right? And trying to teach them as well in making good choices that are higher in protein and that won't make them crash and make them feel full, right? That kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's interesting because with my son, he loves spicy food. Like my son will try anything. He might not like it, but he's like, my rule is I have to try everything. And now he's limited, right? So like things like carrots and corn and all the things he can't have, but he loves spicy food and he can't have it because it affects his
Yeah.
gut.
Yep.
So as a family, I no longer make spicy food. And if, I made the mistake one day, I was feeling lazy. Like we love tacos and I make my own seasoning because
Hmm.
since it's IBD, I'm like, nope, got to make my own. And one
Yep.
day I was lazy. I'm like, no, I'll just grab this off the shelf, at Walmart. It had the tiniest bit of spice. And my son tasted it. He's like, can't have this. And he
Yep.
got so upset. He's like, Mom, you made tacos that are spicy, right? So I think it's just being aware of what you can and cannot have. But yeah, definitely trying different flavors. Like we love doing Asian, we love doing Greek. Like my kids are really open to that. So yeah, I am going to try to sit through some of your recipes with him because he loves to be in the kitchen. But again, I love that you post them and they're quite simple. Like you don't do anything overcomplicated, which I appreciate myself.
Honestly, and in being a mom and in having your kids in activities, I find it
Yeah.
hard to do those complicated type
Yes.
recipes because especially on days where I work in the office, by the time I get home, you know what I mean, I can't sit there and make these complicated recipes. Things that can be prepped in advance are really good, and things that are ready in, like, 30 minutes or less, kind of thing, right? I find that are really helpful, and just like I said, like those single ingredient foods that are, very nutritious, right? High in vitamins. And I like how you mentioned that you make your own seasoning blends,
Yes.
because a lot of times when you buy packaged seasoning,
Yeah.
they have other like preservatives and additives in there that can aggravate your IBD for sure. Because sometimes too, it's like, I bought this thing, it's something I could eat. Why is it bothering me? Right. And
Yeah.
it's, know what the oils in there that are used, or the, certain preservatives that may be affecting, your IBD. So I would do a lot of that too. Like, I remember I never really had like a sensitivity or anything to gluten or dairy, but I would sometimes try gluten free or dairy free products. And, I find that they do have a lot of additives when you buy them
Yes.
over the counter, right? So if I could make my own, like for example, I used to make my own like nut milks or whatever, either almond or cashew, right? Because it's literally two ingredients. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? But
Yeah.
when you go to the store and you look at the ingredient list, there's like 10 ingredients on there, right? So, those like small changes, not just for people with IBD, but just in general,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
Really help, right? Because it's hard when we're at a disadvantage, and like, how things are made and grown and all of that, right? It's kind of puts us at a disadvantage from the get-go.
For sure. And I also think, IBD is, you're predisposed to it, from what I understand. But I'm sure environmental factors obviously, have some sort of an effect. And in our household, I don't think I'm lactose intolerant. I haven't been tested, but I do have a sensitivity. Does my daughter, right? So like, and we love dairy in my house, but like
Yes.
we try to really balance it, right? So my son does really well in dairy, and he does well with gluten, but he also loves the junk food and all the things, and he does well with those things. They don't necessarily hurt his stomach.
Same. Yep.
Yeah, and so he tends to want to eat those things, whereas I'm like, no, let's make healthier choices. But again, at 11 years old, you're like, I don't want to make healthy choices, mom.
Yep.
So we're slowly starting to take steps, and I think that's the key too, is slow and steady. Like I don't want to just clear my cupboards of all the things because my kids will revolt and be upset. You have to kind of work it in. So yeah, I love that. That's the plan to look through your recipes. Now, before we end this incredible episode, I want to know, how can people follow you, reach you, find you online? Because I love Gutsy Girl Diaries. I would suggest everybody follow it because it is just real. Like you're real. You talk about your ostomy on there, and you talk about the hard days, and you're really well rounded, but you also talk about the good days. Like you
Yeah.
don't put, the hardships in there. So how can people find you online, and what can they expect?
So my Instagram is just Gutsy Girl Diaries. That's my handle, and my website is gutsygirldiaries.com. So you can find me both places. My Instagram will have some more up to date recipes than my website, just to be transparent and honest
Yes.
there. And sometimes, if I'm just on the go and I just feel like, filming something that I'm making, and I post to stories or something like that, the better way to find me is on Instagram, I would say. I do have a TikTok account too, but it's not as large.
TikTok is not my
And
friend.
that's just like for fun, like doing also not even IBD related stuff.
Yeah.
Like sometimes I just do like silly videos and things like that. So
Amazing. Well, thank you so very much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Your story is really inspirational, and I know that people will take what they need from it. And if you found this episode helpful in any way, please do share it with a friend. Please follow, subscribe, like, and go check out Gutsy Girl Diaries, because really it's an incredible page. Nadia, thank you so much. We will catch up outside of here and stay in touch. And yeah, I wish you all the best and health, and I want to see you continue thriving. So thank you.
thank you so much for having me.